1950 Census Searches, Part 2, Locational Tools, Expectations, Limitations, and Workarounds. This is January 21st, 2022. This is Revision 1. This is a new video of the original YouTube recording. The original was on January 8th of 2022. I have some more information since then, so therefore this revision. Part 1 of this two-part overview discussed name indexes and what we know about the preliminary name index that the National Archives, I'll abbreviate that as NA, is going to roll out on opening day. It also discussed Family Search's crowdsourcing project to name index the 1950 census. And this logo now, I found this after I had revised the name video, is the first time I've seen this. This is going to be their Family Search U.S. Census Community Project. So they have this little logo now. History is waiting. Get started today. The 1950 U.S. Census will become public on April 1st of 2022. This video that you're looking at discusses 1950 Census locational tools, including district and tract maps, searchable census district definitions, and street indexes. Locational tools can be used when you have a 1950 location or specific address. That should lead you to the correct 1950 ED, that's Enumeration District, and your target people. So let me give you a little overview about enumeration districts. They're an area an enumerator counts. An enumerator is a census taker. Each is given a unique number. You can't use for an area the 1940 EDs because they do change between census years. And since 1930, the ED number is in two parts. That's important. The prefix is the county or large city designation. We'll come back to that later. I do have a whole YouTube video on a primer on EDs, and you might want to look at that. So what are locational tools? They could be 1950 ED maps or description films of the EDs. There are 38 rolls. Those films have been transcribed, so that's another resource. We, at the One Step site, also have an index to searchable streets and other features within every enumeration district for urban areas in 1950. And there's also census tract maps, which usually encompass multiple EDs. We're going to look at all of these in this video. So why locational tools? Why just go through a name index? Because there will be a preliminary one. Well, when there isn't an adequate name index, and it's still up in the air how accurate this preliminary one will be. There may be misspelled and mangled names on the census sheets. So the name index is based upon that. You're not going to see your correct spelling. And then there's poor and illegible census copies. The 1950 census was destroyed after filming, so we can't go back and take a look at the original sheets. In addition to that, it documents a missed residence. A number of people were missed on the 1950 census. The estimate is about 1 out of 20 to 1 out of 25 people were missed. But with a locational tool, you can get to the ED they should have been in. Take a look at the enumerator as it walked down the street. You'll be able to see the address, the addresses there, and you may see that your residents did not participate. Locational tools are for people who are interested in the history of their house and don't know the name of the resident there 70 years ago. And then also it's good for lookups for common names like John Smith. You don't know how many John Smiths there are in major urban areas, and it would be better to look them up by street. by address. So let's first look at Enumeration District 1950 maps. You can hear how raspy my voice is from talking, revising these videos. So I do have a YouTube video on maps, on ED maps. Lots of examples. It's really a fun thing to look at. Some of these maps are really interesting, and it's not your typical map. So you should really look at this video. In addition to that, the National Archives is going to have a lecture series in March, and one of the topics is going to be on mapping the 1950 Census Enumeration District maps at the National Archives. And they're eventually going to put that, I think, as a YouTube video on March 16th. So something to look for. However, this is my take on ED maps. I've had a lot of experience with the 1950 maps. National Archive put about 9,600 of these ED maps on their catalog, and they started putting them on about 2014. They announced it a number of years later. It includes 1950 county ED maps and maps of urban areas with 5 or more EDs. So what you would do is you go to catalog.archives.gov, you would enter 1950 census maps, and then you would put down Cleveland, OH, or Los Angeles, CA for your location. I'll show you another way of doing this in a second. The advantages of 1950 map use is it's a visual strategy to see the ED numbers and its boundaries. You can see what the area looked like in the late 1940s or earlier. Depends on the date of the map. You have an address or location for your targets as of April 1950 and could get the ED number now from the online maps. You don't have to wait for the rollout to get that information. And you don't have to know much about the nature of EDs or how to find them by an online search tool. The disadvantages of map use is that these maps may be illegible due to rips, tape, missing pieces, and generally poor condition or scans. Some of them are barely readable in terms of the street names. The base map of the ED map may be dated many years before 1950, and it even may be a planning map with streets and parts never constructed. The maps usually don't have street indexes, and for large cities there may be dozens of these maps. There's usually a key map as the first map, however. Don't expect communities of less than 5 EDs to have their own online map. You're going to have to go to the county map instead. I know there are missing 1950 census maps on the online and a catalog, because I had a list of goals of urban areas I wanted to produce street index for. We eventually ended up making our own maps. And you can't use the maps if you don't have an address or location for your targets. ED maps generally don't show when an ED has been later split into 2 or more parts with their own unique number and letter. These ED maps were done by Census Bureau cartographers. They estimated how many people would be in there so that an enumerator could handle it. But later a supervisor would find out, hey, there's too many people here for a single enumerator, we're going to split it. Or there's a possibility that they found an institution within that ED that needed its own ED number, so they would split it. The maps don't show the splits. ED maps don't show the ED prefix within each of the ED polygons for large cities. You need to look at the city's map legend to find the prefix and complete the 2-part number. I'll show you examples of that later. In fact, here's the example. So we're at Fort Worth, Texas in 1950. This is part of the map. EDs are, the numbers are in orange. The outline is in orange. The solid really dark outlines are something called census tracts. We'll talk about that later. And you might think that the ED number is 284. It's not. It's not. What you have to do is you have to look at the legend, and you can see on the legend on the bottom it says that all ED numbers are preceded by 261. So that number is actually 261-284, and this may confuse and produce errors for a number of people when they look at these maps. In addition to that, so that's one problem with this map. The second problem is that this particular enumeration district was actually subdivided and split. And so it's split into 261-284A and then 261-284B, and there could be more than two splits, as you can see here. This was for a special project that involved school teachers as enumerators. So these maps do have problems, and I'm going to show you some workarounds. I have a YouTube video on invalid 1950 census map ED numbers. That's mainly incomplete, those missing prefixes or splits. So how can we test an ED number? Well, we can go to the one-step web pages by Stephen P. Morse, and I'll tell you a lot about this as we go along. This is at stevemorse.org, not stevemorse.com, who is a professional musician. You want the U.S. Census section, and you want the Unified Tool, and I suggest you bookmark it. Bookmark the Unified Tool. So if you select a county and you pull down that list, this is what the Unified Tool looks like. The 1950 is at the top. That is the number that we're showing now. There are other censuses that you can do this for. We look at Alabama. We select a county. So if you select a county, you pull down the list and then get a list of ED numbers. You get the list by clicking on that Get 1950 ED numbers on the bottom left. You can check them against your target list to see if any of them were split and show the form like I showed you for Fort Worth, which is the prefix number and then a letter. And that number is the original number, the prefix number, but it no longer exists because it has been split. Similarly, you can do the same thing as if you choose a city or town that we have on our drop-down list. You will then see a list immediately of all the ED numbers in that city, and you can check them against your target ED number list to see if any of them were split. You will also see the prefix number for the city because all of the EDs will have the prefix number. In addition, the one-step site has its own map index. It can point to maps hiding on the National Archive catalog, maps within urbanized area maps, vicinity maps, and even some maps missing from the catalog. So in order to get to that utility, you go to the one-step site, and here I've chosen California, and you pull down the list. We'll choose San Diego County. As soon as you do that, what you're going to see is a pop-up of a link that says See ED Maps for San Diego County. If you click on that, it's going to take you to our Enumeration District Maps in one step, and there are all the maps that are available, not only from the National Archives, but potentially maps that we have added ourselves. One of those maps is Portland, Oregon, that we could not find. I knew it was out for rehabilitation to some extent at the National Archives. It may never be on their catalog. And I have a YouTube video on the process we went through to try and make our own map for Portland. For those of you interested in that city, I think it would be an interesting YouTube to see. There are 5 large cities that we could not find any maps for on the catalog, and we made them ourselves, and our index will point to them. Not only is it Portland, but Jersey City, Worcester, New Haven, Charleston. Even though Charleston does have some maps on the NARA catalog, NARA means National Archive and Records Administration. Shortened is National Archives. That's the vicinity map. That's not the city map that I found. So let me tell you more about this One-Step Web Pages by Stephen P. Morse. Give you a little bit of history of the One-Step Locational Tools. I, Steve Morse, and our volunteers have been producing locational tools for census research for about 20 years. 20 years. Has it been that long? The 1950 census had about 70 volunteers, and we thank all of them for their efforts. All of them. I have a YouTube video which discusses how we got together to start this procedure, this project. Steve is on the left, I'm on the right, and Dave Case is in the middle that brought us together. Unfortunately, Dave died a few years ago. And we have helped a number of people. Those of you who have used the 1940 census index on the National Archives, and I picked this image up recently, may notice that on the first page, down there, I'm going to blow that up, is an acknowledgement that the street indexing and ED conversions, that was done for 40 but not 50, were made possible by the one-step work of Stephen Morse and Joel Weintraub. And to show you the traffic we had, when the 1940 came out in 2012, the one-step site, I think just before it came out, had 135,000 plus hits. And then it came out on April 2nd. The first was a Sunday, so it was not opened on the 1st. And how many hits did the one-step site get? It got over, it got about 2.25 million hits. And we were prepared for that because we didn't have graphics. We have indexes. The National Archives actually had major problems that first week. If I do and I did on January 5th of 2022, a Google search on searching the 1950 census, the first website is Family Search, the second website is the National Archives, and the third one is Steve and my paper on getting ready for the 1950 census on the One-Step site. So we certainly have helped a large number of people. I'm very pleased about that. All right, let's look at another resource, which are these ED films that describe all of the census districts. We have put the films online and have transcribed the descriptions. The National Archive T1224 film series shows over 230,000. That's substantially more than the 1940 ED numbers. Definitions on 38 rolls of film. And I found where those films were online from the various libraries. Got them through interlibrary loan thanks to my institution, California State University, Fullerton, and I digitized them with this simple camera. Took me 7 months from start to finish. Probably took over 30,000 pictures. Once we had them, then Steve put the scans online in 2013. So these ED definition films have been available for probably 8 years so far. And then 27 volunteers helped transcribe the 230,000 plus definitions so that anything that we transcribe can be searchable by name. Show you an example of what these look like, these microfilms. Here we are in McCulloch County, Texas, 1950. This is a screenshot from our utility. And you can see there's not much information here. 154-13 has 579 people, and it's just Justice Precinct 5. I'll show you this again in a second. Here is a little bit more information, but still pretty much a rural area. Clinton County, Kentucky. There's a district number, the name of it, Penny Woods, and some indication it's east of a creek or east of a road or south of a road, etc. Anything in these definitions that we transcribed are searchable. In addition to that, because the 1950 ED definitions dropped the number of unincorporated communities that showed on the 1940 definitions, I went back over the county maps, and anywhere where I thought there was a community, I added the names to our definitions. So about 79,000 additional names were added to our searchable definitions. What that means, for instance, from McCulloch, Texas, and this is part of our database, is that the original definition is there, the justice precincts, but in addition to that, all these small communities are now searchable on the One Step website and will lead to an enumeration district number. So where do you find these ED definition utilities? Well, if you go back to the Unified tool, it's there. So what you need to do is you need to go over, first, of course, you pick the state, and then you go over to the city or town, and you open it up, and then the first thing that's there is Other Specify. And if you select Other Specify, then that box to the right that's dark then opens up and you can type something in. So if you select Other Specify, then you can type in the space on the right the location or term, like maybe hospital or orphanage you are searching, and the utility will show you all the EDs with that term immediately, and it'll be in that area that on the left that says 1950 ED numbers corresponding to your location. In addition to that, the announcement from the National Archive on December 14th indicated that they also had digitized the 1950 ED definition films, did not put them online, and that their descriptions were produced by optical character recognition, OCR output, of the ED description images, and then more than 25 of their staff reviewed and cleaned them up. The OCR images, the images themselves varied dramatically in terms of quality. I decided not to do OCR. These ED definitions are not under privacy rules, and so anybody could look at them and do them. And this utility of the National Archive is not available right now. It may not be available until their official website opens on April 1st of 2022. This is how they did it. In 1940, their equipment to digitize film. In addition to that, the National Archives film series, I told you about that earlier, is going to have a talk on the 1950 Census website, design, development, and features to expect. But it looks like we're going to find out the nitty-gritty at the end of March, a couple of days before it opens. And you can see that the YouTube video is going to be available on March 30th. So I'm not optimistic we're going to find out more detailed information until that time. Now, I have many questions about the National Archives 1950 website, and on the Part 1, the name index, I have lots of questions about that. So I have some questions here about the National Archive ED definitions. And in order to emphasize that, I will change the background and the font when I'm asking these questions. So I'm going to change the font of this presentation and the slide background, as you see here, whenever I ask questions. Give opinions, operate on assumptions, and remember Einstein said most assumptions are wrong, or speculate about the process. So if they have this ED definition utility, definition films show both original and subsequent split ED definitions. Well, only the splits were used for the census. We, the one-step people, only transcribe the splits to avoid confusion. Will NA do the same? Will ED numbers that were void or had no population be included? Will a researcher be able to go directly to the scan of the actual ED from the NA's transcription of that ED number? We have that ability. So the advantages of ED definitions are that it shows the split EDs. You can see the splits. It shows 1950 population of ED. That's kind of interesting. That's on the film. It may show political entities, and it always shows the prefix number of the ED. The ED definition, microfilm is online. We put it online. I expect that the National Archive will be online as well, and searchable through the Unified tool and can be checked against our transcription. And the NA had access to the original documents. Those, I think, are still in existence, and the 1950 schedules, so in places their transcription may be better than the one-steps transcription. But we did a lot of editing ourselves, correcting variations of names and looking at maps to confirm that the ED definitions were accurate. The disadvantages of ED definition use is that some film definitions that we saw were illegible, and we upgraded them the best we could. And National Archive also had problems with their technique, and I would expect that there are going to be a number of errors on these definitions. Now, there's another major limitation of ED definitions, and that's the reason why we produce street indexes. I'll tell you about street indexes in a second. Let me take a drink of water. Okay. So street indexes so far are unique to the one-step site. But if one had a geographical information system and all these sorts of things, and what the National Archive is indicating they have is artificial intelligence and machine learning, it's not impossible that they could generate a street index within each ED also, since addresses are there. Proofing them would be another matter. We proofed them against ED, against 1950 circa maps and modern maps. Did a lot of proofing. So the limitation of ED definitions, especially in urban areas, is for urban areas, the EDs are defined by their boundary features. I'm going to show you this. Internal ED streets, unless there also fall on boundaries on some other areas, don't even show on the ED definition search tool. Let me show you that. So here we have Portland, Oregon, 37-53. It shows the tract number, and then it shows on 4 lines the boundaries of the enumeration district. So on the north boundary, we have Harold in the southeast part of this city. On the east boundary, we have 69th Avenue on the south and the west. So those are boundary. Show you another example. This is San Francisco. This is actually a split ED. This is, I think, 38210A. You see the same format. That on the north side of the boundaries are Blanken Avenue, Tunnel Avenue, and Lathrop Avenue. We have an ED definition that we transcribed here. We added the north, east, south, and west sides, as you can see. However, that's not all the streets in that enumeration district. These are additional streets like Wheeler Avenue that are internal streets that the ED definitions will not pick up. They will not pick up. And that's the reason why we had a full street index for each enumeration district. So my questions are, based upon these definitions, will the National Archive utility, will ED boundary descriptions where found be included in the transcription, or is it just going to be the political definition? Will National Archive add the compass aids, that northeast, southwest that we pioneered, to show on which side of the ED polygon a boundary street appears? And could they're very secretive, or did the National Archive actually produce 1950 street indexes from the census sheet addresses? Don't know. Just speculation on my part. Okay, so the one-step 1950 street indexes, we have that online. We did a lot of urban areas. I think if we ever do this again, and it's not clear if we will, we'll only do cities of over 50,000. But here, we pretty much did lots and lots of these smaller and large communities. And we transcribed the streets and other features from ED maps and ED definitions, including in even institutions and parks and cemeteries. So if you don't know your particular address, but you knew it was next to this park or this cemetery, look up the park name and the cemetery on the street index. You might find it that way. I have YouTube videos on demonstrating how to use the unified tool for urban and rural location searches. We'll go into that here. The advantages of ED street indexes is it's an efficient system when it works. Searching text is always easier than searching graphics. It's a very fast system. And but I always suggest that you check it against maps or anything else that we get. We often compensated during our street index transcription for poor 1950 maps, renamed streets, and streets missing from the 1950 ED maps, because we often had circa 1950 maps to proof them against. Once you have the ED number, you can then go directly to the census schedule. Once it opens, transcribed ED definition or ED film scan to cross-check the information. Let me show you that. So whenever we show you ED numbers, there will be this radio buttons there. If you clicked or made the census pages active and then clicked on the ED number, you should be able to get to the first page of the ED number once it opens up. We're hopeful that within a day or two after it opens on April 1st, that we'll be able to take you directly to the first page of the ED that we have found for you, and then you can have to look through each page for your address. But we also can go to the actual microfilm description and to our transcription from the radio buttons. The disadvantages of ED street indexes are you need to use the street names on the block of your target residence. This is a block approach, not a specific address. And you usually get that from modern maps. A modern map, however, might show renamed, renumbered, and restructured streets. I mean, it's 70 years later, in your 1950 area, not the original street name. And your street showing within the city in 2022 may have been outside the city in 1950 and will not be represented on the street index. Get a lot of questions from people. I can't find this street on your street index, and then I find out it's not in the city in 1950. And street omissions are a problem. So the last thing I want to talk about are census tract maps. This is probably the least useful of the locational tools. Census tracts are small, uniquely numbered, relatively permanent statistical subdivisions of a county. They usually contain multiple enumeration districts. The advantage of them is you don't have a target address, but know in general the part of the city your targets lived in. And if you can get the census tract number, it will lead to one or more EDs. The disadvantage is that not all urban areas have these numbers. The numbers may not be part of their transcribed ED definitions. Show you why that's important in a second. And you may have to look through dozens of EDs within a census tract number to find your targets. There are a few places that show census tract numbers that enclose the area of your target residence. Let me show you them. The first one is actually the Enumeration District Maps. And so here's the city of Pasadena and vicinity for 1950. You notice that the legend says all ED numbers preceded by 68. And here's a part of the map that I want to show you. You can see it's not really a great map. It's been taped. The streets are pretty illegible, etc. So let's look at how to read these maps. The 11 is the Enumeration District. It's in orange, but it's actually 68-11. There is actually a block number. And then there's the census tract number, which is often easier to find. And so that 413 has a number of EDs, 11, 12, 13, 6, 7, etc. The census tracts are defined by these heavy lines, so that you go down to 418B, you can see that heavy line defines it. Census tracts are found on housing block maps. And I have a YouTube video on these. The housing information is available for every block in some large cities. It's summary information. And 213 large cities, 50,000 or more, have pamphlets that show housing information that's available online with maps and tables. I explain that on my YouTube video. So here's what the Pasadena, California map looks like, the housing from the housing pamphlet. You can see there's no EDs here, but it shows very clearly that this area is Census Tract 413. And then, should point out that I've gone through all these pamphlets. There are 26 missing maps. And I wrote to the Census Bureau reference librarians who very kindly provided me with those. And we have all of the maps on one of the utilities on the One Step website. Okay, so here we are back at the Unified tool. And if you look at the city or town, other specify, I put in Tract 413. I just chose California, didn't choose a county, and did Tract 413. And when I did that, you can see where the ED numbers appear on the bottom left. So let's go through that. Step 1, you choose a state. 2, you choose other specify. 3, you put something in that you think is on the enumeration district definition. And whenever there was a tract number, we did transcribe that. 4, you see all the EDs. 5, you press more details. And what that's going to do is going to take you to a table of our transcribed EDs for Pasadena. And so now at least you have visually descriptions of each of these and on their boundaries. So we, Steve Morse, myself, and our volunteers wish you good luck with your 1950 census searches. I'm going to be on it for the very first time, and so will Steve Morse. This has been another of my JDW talks. I have YouTube talks on census resources. I have over 20 on the 1950 census, on Ellis Island immigrants and immigration. And then I'm a retired field biologist, and I have lots of talks on natural history topics, mostly birds, birding optics, and virtual birding field trips, and a number of other topics of interest to me, including even novelty zithers. And that address in yellow that I've highlighted will take you to my channel, and you can see the variety of talks that I have put online. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope that I am reducing your learning curve so that you'll be prepared when the 1950 census comes online April 1st, 2022.